On my 32nd birthday, my boyfriend taps his spoon against a glass. The candles flicker in the rented rooftop breeze, and the laughter that follows his first joke slices so cleanly I don't feel the bleed until I taste it. The rooftop looks like a lifestyle spread someone saved for later and finally decided to copy. String lights drooping in perfect scallops, a skyline leaning in for the photos, a long table set with linen that feels expensive even from across the plank. He told me he wanted the night to feel effortless, which is what people say when someone else has done the work, and as he lifts his monogram gift to me, a wine glass with my initials etched in looping script, I see the hairline crack running up the stem, the thin silvery vein you only notice when the candlelight catches it just right. The guest list is curated to flatter him. Half these people know me the way you know a barista who remembers your order, friendly but replaceable, and when he clears his throat and grins at the crowd, they lean forward like disciples. He starts his roast with the gentle, supposedly loving nuisances, the way I color code grocery receipts, the way I refuse to let a podcast play in the background because I think attention is a kind of respect, the way I check the door twice before bed. The chuckles are warm enough to pass as affection. Then he slides into the material he knows hits harder, my career detours, his phrase for every pivot I've made with a spine instead of a script, the failed startup he likes to mention like a cautionary tale. The student loans he jokes are our third roommate. Laughter breaks clean across the table, the kind that lands like judgment because it is. I try to smile, but I feel the burn of it under my skin, the slow, humiliating sizzle of being turned into a party trick. I start reading the crowd the way I used to read investors. His sister pretends to dab at a tear, leans in to whisper something that stiffens his posture, and then looks at me with the particular sympathy reserved for women who, in her mind, should be grateful for guidance. His best friend Jake keeps checking the elevator door as if he's expecting a delivery of absolution. Two women from his office, both loyal since he learned their kids' names, match each other's laughter like a duet. Every time I lift a glass to my mouth, the crack glints and I set it down carefully, afraid of applying 1 ounce too much pressure to a thing that is supposed to hold. Silence is a muscle I've overtrained. I've held peace like it was my job, smoothed edges, made room for egos, let kindness mislabel itself as patience. But tonight, with the wind moving the candle flames and his voice warming to the rhythm of making me small, I feel the opposite of collapse. I feel a stillness rising, a solidness that doesn't require permission. The sealed bank envelope that slid under my door this morning sits in my clutch like a carefully weighted truth. I had turned it over in my hands 3 times, recognized his bank's logo and my own name on the address line, and tucked it away because nothing ruins a day like a fact you can't unknow. Now, as he gestures for the airplane story, the one where a TSA agent embarrassed me and he retells it like comedy, I feel the taste of paper memory on my tongue. He taps the mic and gives me that magnanimous smile people love to see on a host who seems to share the stage while holding the reins. I tap the mic once in return, just enough for the soft pop to ripple, and a hush falls that isn't romantic, it's anticipatory. The candles tremble, steady, and the skyline looks close enough to touch. I stand, slower than drama and firmer than nerves, and let my chair scrape back so gently it barely registers. I lift the envelope with the deliberate grace of a magician, making sure the audience sees both hands. Paper lift, measured breath, eyes level. My voice drops into the tone I use when I need a room to remember what it hears. I want to thank you all, I say, and the gratitude is real, even as I feel the edges of it. For the effort, the food, the music, the attention, for celebrating me. I let the word sit, then continue with a line I've practiced in my head without knowing I was practicing it. And because tonight is about transparency, I'd like to add one small thing to the program. I can feel the crowd shifting, not back toward him but forward toward me, and the wind seems to pause as the paper edges my palm. I breathe into the stillness until my pulse steadies, until the burn of ridicule cools enough to make room for clarity. He laughs too smoothly, the kind of laugh that looks around for friends. "Babe, don't tell me you brought your spreadsheets," he says, and the table titter returns for a second before dissolving. I keep my gaze on the letterhead and let the weight settle in my hands. I'm not here to match his tempo. I am here to create my own. I lift the page higher so the seal catches the candles, and in that tiny theater light, I feel the shape of the room reconfigure, the sound of attention tightening like a drawstring. The envelope opens without drama. The document slides free with the faint rasp that always makes paper feel like a verdict. I smooth the crease, I stand square, and I realize I am no longer small in this scene. I unfold the letter, look him in the eyes, and say, "Before your next joke, does everyone here know your house is in foreclosure?" Their chuckles die mid-breath as the bank's header gleams under the patio lights. The quiet is not delicate. It is the kind of quiet that happens in theaters when the projector stutters and the audience realizes the story they thought they were watching has a tear down the center. A woman near the ice bucket exhales a syllable that wants to be sympathy but trips on disbelief, and a man by the railing mutters, "Is she serious?" As if seriousness were the greater crime. Candles flicker without breeze, caught in the updraft of attention, and the patio becomes a classroom where even the light is trying to read. I keep the page at chest height, the measured toast line still hovering between us, and I feel the temperature shift from convivial warmth to brittle appraisal, like glass cooling after the blow. It would be convenient if I could say I expected this moment from the start. The truth is less cinematic and more human. We met at a volunteer shift when my startup had just folded, and his charm felt like a safety rail I did not have to build myself, a hand at the small of my back, guiding me through a crowded room without shoving. He learned the names of the people who mattered to me, sent a bouquet on the day I closed the books, and told me failure was not character. It was data for the next attempt. I believed him because I wanted to, and because when you are tired of being the only adult in your story, the promise of rest masquerading as partnership can pass for love. He made ordinary life feel like a solved puzzle, and I let that ease become the wallpaper I stopped inspecting. The first breadcrumb, now that I'm holding the whole loaf, was the envelope itself. Addressed to me, not to him, the lettering clean and centered, the zip code correct, the kind of administrative precision bankers pride themselves on, and yet the content belonging to a life I did not hold the keys to. It had been slid under my door with the circulars, as if its journey could be mistaken for routine. The return logo triggered a physical recognition that started in my throat and worked down to my stomach, and even before I opened it, I knew the paper was about money and debt and timelines that do not forgive fantasies. The fact of my name on his problem was not an accident. It was either a clerical error with teeth or a deliberate rerouting of consequences, and neither possibility was benign. I lowered the letter enough to see the faces I am supposed to call community. His friends operate like a chorus trained to echo on his cue, their eyebrows lifting in unison when he raises a hand, their laughter arriving on schedule, their posture open while their attention narrows onto the center he occupies. My two real friends are here, tucked by the drink station like stagehands told to stay out of the shot, their eyes on me rather than the spectacle, ready to step in if I nod, but refusing to turn a rescue into a scene-stealing moment. I file that loyalty like a diamond, different light, different pressure, indestructible. The red flags lay themselves out with fresh clarity now that I am willing to read. The business trips taken on Saturdays that required no luggage, only a charged phone and a promise to bring back dinner. The disappearing afternoons that left no receipts. The password-protected spreadsheet on his tablet labeled with an innocuous name and guarded with a degree of vigilance he never applied to anything of mine. He told me some men take mistresses. He took metrics, and he meant it as a joke. But the line hit a worldview like a double-bottom drawer hides a gun. I tried his passcode exactly once, failing, and he laughed in a tone that surprised me, a tone with a hinge that squeaked. I set the cracked wineglass down with the care of someone refusing to be the brake. The hairline vein along the stem catches the candlelight and throws back a warning so faint most eyes would miss it. I do not miss it, and I decide that I will not be the thing that shatters to satisfy the room's appetite for drama. The stakes, now that the letter breathes between us, are not rhetorical. The house named in the notice is collateral for a loan I never knew existed, a number large enough to rearrange futures, framed in language that assumes consent because paperwork can be taught to mimic it. If my name appears anywhere inside those pages without my hand, I am not just the butt of a joke, I am the soft target of a fraud. He forces a smile so taut it looks like a rubber band about to snap, and he beckons me toward the kitchen with the small proprietary gesture men use in public to make private messes. "Let's talk, babe." he says for the crowd, his voice pitched to soothing, the host reasserting control of the timeline. I stand my ground for a beat longer than is polite, because politeness has paid too many bills that did not have my name on them. Then, because strategy sometimes wears the clothes of concession, I nod once and step toward the swinging door, keeping the letter visible, the paper lift deliberate, the invitation to witnesses implicit. The candles flare as we pass, and for a moment their light follows me like respect that finally remembered where to land. He waits until the door hushes behind us and hisses, "Where did you get that letter?" And I meet his eyes and say, "From your banker." The banker dialed my number by mistake, asked to confirm my co-signer status. The call came the morning of the party, the kind of gray bright Boston light that makes everything look polished and a little cold, and the number on my phone registered as unlisted, which usually means a delivery confirmation or a wrong number, never a voice that knows my middle initial, as if we've been exchanging signatures for years. He introduced himself with the gentleness of someone trained to keep clients calm, asked if he had R correct, then repeated my full legal name with the precision of a notary, and before I could ask why he was calling me, not my boyfriend, he asked if I could confirm I was indeed the co-signer on the Woodland Avenue property loan, a question that unhooked my breath and made the room tilt in a way no elevator ever has. Everything about the call felt engineered to sound routine. His tone professionally warm, the phrasing neutral and careful, the cadence slow enough to imply I'd been looped into this process at some earlier point and simply needed to check a box. But the fact of it, my name threaded into a financial instrument I had never seen, carried an electric wrongness that ran from ear to chest to stomach, and sat there like a weight I couldn't redistribute. When I said there must be a mistake, he apologized with the practiced regret of a person who has delivered bad news enough times to know that the words matter less than the record they leave. And then he asked again about the middle initial, as if identity were a lock he could pick with politeness. After we hung up, I stood in my hallway staring at the pile of mail that had slid under the door at dawn, a familiar stack of circulars and coupons, and one festive envelope addressed in my aunt's looping script, the kind of old-fashioned cursive that makes you straighten your posture and write a better thank you note. Under that envelope, tucked like an afterthought, and yet radiating the opposite of casual, was the bank's letter, clean-lined, logo forward, addressed to me with a precision that felt like a dare. The birthday card's corner was torn, a small triangle missing from the pink, which could have been a sorting accident, except the tear was just large enough that, when layered, my name would show while his did not, and even before I slit the seal, I understood that someone wanted the paper to find me first. If his roast on the rooftop was a performance, the cruelty I'd absorbed as clumsy affection in front of his friends became, in the light of that phone call, a tactic that made terrible sense, a way to set the story before I could tell it, to mark me as flighty and unserious, so that when I raised questions about signatures and debt and the geometry of consent, the chorus would have a script at the ready. It is an old sleight of hand. Ridicule as primer, humiliation as primer, control the narrative before facts arrive, and when the facts finally walk in, make them look like a tantrum instead of a testimony. I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop open to the bank's fraud page, reminding myself that co-signing without consent isn't a lover's dispute or a misunderstanding born of shared bills. It is fraud, it is forgery, it is identity theft dressed up as intimacy, and no amount of affection or shared dinners or thrown parties can turn unwitnessed signatures into legal instruments that bind me. I had never signed, not at a branch, not digitally, not with a power of attorney, not in wine-soft trust at midnight, and the law, for once, sat on my side of the table like a friend who did not need me to explain why. His sister texted while I was drafting my questions for the banker. Her tone that chirpy competence women use when they want to be seen as peacemakers and enforcers in the same breath. He'll fix it. Don't ruin tonight. The sentence did acrobatics I refused to admire, centered his comfort, minimized my reality, treated the party like a shrine, and my clarity like an act of vandalism, and I stared at it until the screen dimmed and admitted to myself that the request wasn't about repair. It was about choreography, about keeping the optics clean while the documents hardened. I decided in that moment that I would ruin whatever protected a lie, not because I love drama or because public scenes are currency to me, but because shame thrives in private and fraud counts on closed doors, and I have kept too many rooms tidy for other people at the expense of my own name. If I had to be the woman who interrupts a party with a document, then I would be the woman who interrupts a party with a document, not to humiliate, but to force daylight into a place designed for shadow. So when he tapped the glass that night and turned my life into material, when the burn of ridicule rose and then receded into a steady stillness that let me hear my own breath, I reached for the envelope with a hand that did not shake, and I stepped into the space his jokes had cleared, and I let the paper lift speak before I did. The measured toast line was not spontaneity. It was a boundary that had been collecting itself all day, from the banker's polite recitation of my middle initial to the torn corner of a pink card that failed to hide a threat, from the text that treated my caution as rudeness to the discovery that my name had been rehearsed without me. Back on the patio, with candles marking time and phones tilted down and faces turning toward the letterhead as if it were a screen, I understood that reading the notice aloud was not impulse, it was protection, a record carved into the memory of witnesses who could not be coached later into forgetting. I breathed. I let the hush fill and settle. I chose the sentence that would keep the focus where it belongs, on the ink rather than the performance. I look up from the page and announce to the room, the signature on this loan isn't mine. The signature curves like mine, but the loop on the R betrays a forger's hand. I lay the letter flat under the patio lights and angle the paper until the ink stops shining back at me, the way a jeweler tilts a stone to catch its flaws, and I feel the old muscle memory in my wrist from the third grade afternoon my teacher taught us cursive like it was a right. My R has always carried a flourish I can't unlearn, a soft oval loop that begins inside the stem before it glides outward, a small act of insistence that made every report card feel mine even when the grades did not. On this page, the ADT, our R is a performance of that flourish, a stiff-muscled imitation that starts too high and hooks too sharp, as if someone practiced from a photo and mistook style for motion. The tail on the wave I dips at an angle I never use, crossing a baseline I never cross, and the pressure dots along the curve look like a pen gripped by a hand trying to memorize me rather than a hand that belonged to me. For everyone watching and for the version of myself who will replay this later, I explained that banks do not rely on vibes. They rely on traces that hold up under audit. When a loan is signed in person, the branch notarizes identity, scans IDs, logs timestamps, captures signatures more than once to compare, and collects contact acknowledgments that should ping your inbox like small alarms. When a loan is signed electronically, the verification shifts to IP addresses, device IDs, geolocation, multi-factor prompts, and knowledge-based questions drawn from public records that ask what street you lived on at 19 and what car you once insured. Couples, trusting the ecosystem of us, sometimes share passwords, and autofill allows consent to masquerade as convenience. That is how fraud happens in living rooms instead of alleys, on couches between episodes, with the language of love covering the mechanics of theft. I say this without heat because instruction helps the room breathe, and because facts are armor when the performance tilts toward chaos. A woman near the cake lifts her phone and frames the page as if she is documenting a meteor before it disappears. Another guest takes a step backward toward the elevator and presses the button like a spiritual practice, eyes averted, the kind of exit that pretends to be polite while it avoids becoming part of the record. The candles flicker as if the wind has something to add, the flame bending and righting itself in a rhythm that steadies my breath. I keep one palm on the letter and one on my clutch, feeling for the outline of my phone the way a diver checks their air, not because I want to run, but because I want the facts to live somewhere outside paper. He pivots the way men do when charm is a toolkit and contrition is a costume they believe you will recognize as love. We agreed after wine one night, he says, shaping his voice to sound like memory rather than invention, inviting the chorus to imagine a cozy confidentiality I must be betraying by reading in public. He tilts his head, puts a hand to his heart as if he has one spare, and lets the tiniest laugh float to where my friends stand, a sound designed to turn reason into overreaction. I keep receipts because I learned the hard way that memory is no match for someone else's confidence. I open my messages and scroll to the week he means, every bubble time stamped and so boringly wholesome, it becomes my favorite genre. Boarding now, from me at 9:42 p.m. Wheels up from me at 10:19. Landed at 1:03 a.m. How was your night? Finds no reply until midday because he said he slept like a rock, a detail that now sounds less like rest and more like an alibi. I pull my calendar up on the projector menu, and the square glows with red-eye details, confirmation number, gate, the miles I added out of habit, while the bank's notice in my email sits with its timestamp like a witness whose memory does not sweat. My hands do not shake, and I let that steadiness do more talking. Then my mouth. He tries to catch my eyes like a fisherman trying to loop a line around something he knows is no longer swimming his way. You're making this bigger than it is, he says, and I watch his sisters nod from the far end of the table, the choreography of minimizing rehearsed enough to count as muscle memory. I flip the letter to reveal the last page where the notary stamp should sit, and the rectangle is fuzzy, the seal impression shallow, the registration number smudged in a way that wants to suggest a faulty printer rather than a faulty conscience. A few people lean closer, their faces forgetting to perform neutrality. The room is learning the difference between awkward and wrong. I take a breath long enough to reach the part of me that promised not to shrink, and I offer him a neutral ground because truth behaves better when everyone can see it. Let's project your ledger screenshots, I say, keeping my tone so even the word ledger could pass for something festive. The syllables hang there like a bridge, and I watch the split-second panic flash across his face, so quick a casual acquaintance would miss it. The tiny recoil of a man who knows his private math might not survive public air. I add, because clarity is a kindness even when it cuts. The folder labeled wellness on your phone will do. He blinks hard, then makes a show of being offended that I know the names of his apps, that I would dare suggest the sacred space of wellness contains anything but meditation and steps, and the overacting buys him exactly 2 seconds. In that beat, several heads swivel between us with an awareness I have been waiting for since the first candles were lit. I gesture toward the TV and the HDMI cable, toward the calm island where facts can gather, and I feel the room tilt with me, a gathering of currents that finally choose the deeper channel. He lunges to grab my phone, fingers grazing the case, and the cracked wineglass skitters off the table and shatters against the floor. His budget app includes initials, dates, and addresses, and a column titled Leverage. The sound of glass breaking pulls every eye like a magnet, but I don't flinch. I step over the glittering shards, slide my phone back into my palm, and let the room watch me choose calm. A staffer from downstairs bends to fetch a broom, the bristles whispering against the wood like a stagehand moving scenery. He tries to recover with a laugh and an apology that never makes it to his mouth because I've already swiped open AirDrop and tapped the TV name. A small constellation of dots blinks, then the first spreadsheet blooms across the screen in columns the color of ice water. The candles flicker against the glass frame, tiny flames reflected along the bezel like a chorus of witnesses. Rows of initials, dates, addresses. To the right, categories that are not categories anyone would use for groceries or utilities. Favors. Introductions. Carry. And then a column that makes people inch closer involuntarily. Leverage. A few phones rise to capture the grid, and in that tiny lift, the room changes species. This is no longer a party surviving awkwardness. It is a record in progress. I scroll. Under leverage, the notes read like a private indictment. DB, divorce filing stalled, needs cash for retainer. MT, job security low, boss hates him, offer interview. AS, immigration renewal delayed, introduce attorney, attach fee to sale. The words look clinical until you translate the euphemisms back into people, and then the grid burns. I keep my voice steady, a measured toast line designed to hold us all in the same sentence. For clarity, I say, this is his so-called budget tool. Not expenses, not goals, people, with dollar amounts. A few guests who laughed hardest earlier develop quiet hands, palms pressed to thighs as if to keep themselves from assisting the narrative any further. He tries to position himself between me and the screen, and I slide a half step to the left without taking my eyes off the audience. The kind of footwork women learn from crowded subways and boardrooms where chairs don't appear unless we pull them up ourselves. I scroll again, and the names turn into instructions. HOA Fast Track. a recurring label that appears beside multiple addresses, highlighted in the same cool blue as an invitation you never sent. Create urgency, code violation. Backdate notice. Coordinate with J.K. The initials pinch my chest before my mind names them. Jake, his best friend, the one who called for the airplane story like it was the national anthem. Next to Jake's column, a roll repeats, find buyer. I let the cursor rest there long enough for the implication to land. It isn't just him. It's him plus a network of hands, a chorus that doesn't only laugh on command, but moves paperwork and pressure when cued. The pattern clarifies with every line, a house flipping ring that doesn't wait for opportunity so much as manufacture it, that reads neighborhoods the way a shark reads current, that maps grief and confusion in red tape as if those were streets to be driven. This isn't budgeting, I say, because sometimes the simplest sentence does the most work. This is extraction disguised as entrepreneurship. A murmur rises from the back, that human sound made of shame and recognition and distance closing. Someone near the rail slips forward and then back again, as if they might fall off the night. I scroll to the tab names, and they flick by like chapters in a book I never agreed to write. Prospects. Carry? Escrow. Collateral. I tap collateral. The grid loads, and my throat tightens so fast my first breath stutters. There is my full name, spelled correctly. Timestamped 6 weeks ago. To the right, a note column. Solid viso, cosign possible, offset debt. With promo, the detached tone makes my skin prickle, because the man who toasted to my quirks and called my debt our third roommate also filed me under asset class. The candles throw a quiver of light across the screen, and it looks like the cells tremble. I do not let that tremble become me. I press a hand to the letter on the table the way you press a palm to a wound, not to hide it but to feel its edges, and when I speak the room quiets as if the mic has been tapped again. If you put a person on a spreadsheet, I say, you should be prepared to explain the math out loud. I lift my glass, not to drink, but to mark a ritual, and level it toward the crowd. New toast, I say, and there's a sliver of irony in the phrase, but no apology. To informed consent, to never signing a thing you haven't read, to never being added where you haven't agreed. I let the glass hover and then set it down carefully, the crack along the stem aligned with the seam of the table, a private promise to myself that I will not break to make anyone comfortable. He starts in with the old tactics, the shrug that wants to look like humility, the half smile that wants to look like credible shock. Babe, you're misreading. Those are leads, notes, not... He stops because the next row betrays him. L. Hospice. Son overwhelmed. Introduce buyer. Waive inspection. The word hospice slides across the room like a cold. Several guests avert their eyes, as if their pupils might be called to testify. Jake, somewhere near the end of the table, has both hands deep in his pockets and his gaze low, and now that the screen has said his job out loud, his loyalty looks less like friendship and more like a revenue stream. I scroll once more, not to punish but to show the pattern thoroughly, for myself as much as for them. Address, address, address. Street names that used to mean families and porches and holiday lights turned into tactics and dates and checkboxes. I hear someone whisper, "My God," in that flattened way people reserve for the moment between discovery and action. Between rows, the cursor passes another HOA fast track, and a man near the end of the table swallows hard and rounds his shoulders as if he's been spotted. The TV hums, the candles steady, the rooftop breathes like a shared lung. I lower the phone, an act of mercy and authority at once, and I let stillness make the next word heavier. A woman steps forward from the middle of the crowd, eyes wide and wet, and says, "That's my mother's address." The woman, Anna, lives 4 doors down. Her elderly mother's house is on his ledger under probate watch. She says her name like a stake in the ground, slow and steady, and the room rearranges around it. Anna steps closer to the screen, eyes fixed not on me or on him, but on the row that has turned her family into a project line. She explains that it started with a yellow notice slapped on her mother's front gate, a surprise code violation for a handrail that had been sturdy for 20 years, followed 3 days later by another violation for peeling paint that had not peeled until 2 men in polos inspected it with a scraper. A week after the second notice, a lion arrived with the speed of bad news that knows the route, and with it came a pushy buyer named Jake, who spoke fluent concern and carried a folder of comps like a pastor carries scripture. He told them the fines would double if they contested, that the inspection backlog could take months, that the kind thing, the sensible thing, would be to sell before the city bled them dry. I keep the spreadsheet on the TV, the cursor a thin hum at the edge of Anna's address, and the pattern reveals itself in a way that makes my mouth dry. Grief mapped like a weather system, urgency created like a product launch, lowball offers dressed as mercy. Anna says her father died last winter, and her mother's balance slipped without him. Appointments missed, bills stacked, energy spent on getting through breakfast. Jake had known the date of the funeral, and somehow the date of the first hearing on the estate paperwork, and when she asks him how, he says it's public record, as if legality and decency were synonyms. Every detail fits the grid, and the grid fits the day's other facts until I can see the ring as clearly as I can see the skyline bending around us. While Anna speaks, I feel a pressure behind my ribs that is not anger's heat. It is the slow ache of recognition. I think about the dates on the bank's foreclosure notice that arrived with my mail, the way they align with his sudden business trips and disappearing Saturdays that took him not to airports but to neighborhoods, not to clients but to kitchens where paperwork gets signed beside a cooling cup of tea. The ledger's timestamps and the bank's letters talk to each other like old friends. I want to stop the projector and pin every date to a calendar, a forensic map of deceit. Instead, I keep my posture soft and my grip sure, because if I teach the room anything tonight, it will be how not to doubt your own eyes when a pattern starts to draw itself. His sister pushes her chair back and adopts the tone of a woman accustomed to managing unfortunate optics. He saves houses from blight, she says, hands open in a reasonable shape, as if houses were stray dogs and paperwork were a bowl of water. There is a wobble in her confidence that only family can hear, but the sentence is practiced enough to travel. I watch a few faces tilt toward her, as if they have been waiting for a script that lets them leave intact. I keep my gaze on the ledger, and then on Anna. Saving doesn't require forging my name, I say, and I let the syllables land in their own time. The candles flutter and then hold. The mic on the bar pops once as the DJ mutes the playlist, the room accepting that music is no longer our language. Anna nods like the sentence built a small bridge between us. Others follow her across. A neighbor I know only by his baseball cap steps forward to say he received a violation last month for offense that met code in 2019. A woman who lives 2 buildings over says she too was offered help by a man who knew her salary and her lease end date. Someone in the back dials the bank on speaker, the sterile hold music filling a seam of silence that had been waiting for a different sound. My 2 real friends move through the cluster with soft voices and firm questions, collecting names and numbers as if weaving a net. He tries to move back into the center of the circle with assurances and explanations, but the room has learned a new choreography and he is out of step. I feel shame flare and then settle, not because I am guilty of his choices, but because I can see all the places I bent my attention away from their shapes. I wanted our future to be true, so I called the rough edges quirks, the gaps in his story privacy, the separate devices and passwords respect. I held my breath when the banker said my middle initial, because breath is the first thing you sacrifice when you love someone who needs oxygen the most when they are wrong. I let none of that self-reproach show on my face now, because there is a difference between accountability and self-harm, and tonight requires the first without the second. I lift the letter again, a small paper flag, and draw the circle back to the only country that matters here, the record. You put people on a spreadsheet and you put my name on a loan, I say, looking at him and then back to the group so they remember themselves in this. If your work is so civic-minded, you won't mind us confirming every signature. Someone's voice by the speaker announces that a fraud specialist will join the call, and the hold music clicks to a lower key. There is a shift I can feel more than see as guests begin to stand next to me rather than across from me. Loyalty migrates. It always does when truth gives it a place to land. My phone vibrates against my palm, the screen lighting my wrist with a white band of attention, and the number reads unknown in that impersonal warning way. I let it ring twice so the room can witness the choice I make, And then I swipe because transparency cuts both ways. The voice is calm, male, and practiced at menace as policy rather than emotion. Stop reading, he says, or the liens become police reports on you. The caller lists my social security digits like a nursery rhyme, then hangs up. He sings the first 5 the way children chant jump rope counts, soft and unhurried, then clips the last 4 into my ear like staples. The line goes dead. I stand with the phone still lifted, listening to the absence, and feel the old debate ignite, fear asking me to shrink, fury reminding me that shrinking is how people like this make room to operate. I steady my breath in 4s the way I learned around medical bills and investor denials. In for 4, hold for 4, out for 4, hold for 4. A square I can draw on air when paper isn't enough. The patio's hush has texture now. The candles flicker as if the wick itself is eavesdropping, and the faces around me wait to see which part of me will take the mic. Panic or spine? Panic wants privacy. Spine knows a crowd can be a shield. I lower the phone, tell the room what the voice did, and feel the shock travel like a current. He stands a few feet away, arms crossed in a pose that tries for bored but lands on vigilant, eyes flicking to the screen, to me, to the letter, to my hands. I don't hand him the fear. I place it beside the fury and choose strategy. The memory arrives not as an epiphany but as a nudge. The torn birthday card in the morning mail pile, the pink envelope with the missing corner that conveniently masked the bank's return address. When I slid the card out earlier, it felt heavier than the paper warranted. Now, with the caller's threat still vibrating in my ear, I picture the flap and the way it resisted. I open my clutch, fish out the card, and run a finger along the crease until I feel it, tape over tape. I peel back the paper. A tiny USB, matte black, hides in the seam like a secret that trusted I wouldn't look directly at it. On the label, neat and unthreatening in block letters, someone has printed HOA minutes, too obvious to be innocent. The words are chosen to lull, like a forged signature practicing charm. Minutes that matter do not need disguises. Minutes that incriminate often wear the costumes of routine. I glance from the drive to the ledger still glowing on the TV and make a tactical shift. Public spectacle has done its job. Witnesses, context, the narrative unspun. Now I need verifiable facts that survive both denial and charm. I raise a hand to the neighbor nearest the projector, a guy I know only as the one who always has an Allen wrench when the mailbox is loosened, and ask if he'll babysit the screen, keep the spreadsheet up, and note any rows that match addresses in the building. He nods and plants himself by the HDMI cable like a bouncer who understands the dress code is truth. I cross to the bar where my laptop waits, the surface still warm from the last time I checked the email timestamps, and set the torn card beside it as a breadcrumb I can point to later if anyone asks how we got from threat to proof. The measured sounds of the party, glasses set down, chairs scraped back, someone clearing a throat on the phone with the bank, form a kind of metronome as I slide the USB into my palm. That's when Jake appears, smile wide enough to show intent and teeth. "Let me help," he says, reaching for the laptop with an ease that tells me how many rooms he's moved through on the strength of his grin. HDMI's finicky on this model. I'll fix it. A week ago I would have let him. A month ago I might have thanked him. Tonight I keep the machine close and let his hand meet air. "We're good," I tell him, because some sentences should be short when everything else is elaborate. He keeps the smile but adds a squint, the kind of performance that wants the audience to think I'm making a moment out of nothing. "Tech can be tricky," he says, tone slipping from helpful to patronizing by a single degree. I nod and turn the laptop so the webcam reflects not Jake, but the room behind him. Witnesses stacked like proofs. The USB clicks into the port with a sound that is both ordinary and ceremonial. I feel the slight resistance, the give, the contact, and rest my left hand on the lid for a breath that draws the square in air again. In the corner of my eye, I catch his sister texting furiously, thumbs like sparrows, her posture intent, the disaster response team of a family that has always trusted optics to outrun substance. I ignore the performative urgency and click open the drive. The directory populates. Not PDFs and agendas, not tidy bullet points on signage and mulch. A single parent folder titled Minutes expands into subfolders labeled by month and then by date, and inside those, MP4 icons stacked like tiles. Recorded Zoom calls. The file names include strings that should never sit beside neighborhood matters, initials of board members, address fragments, and a word that tightens my scalp. Expedite. I double-click the most recent. The player window opens. The thumbnail freezes on a gallery of faces I recognize only from whispered complaints in the lobby and a holiday wreath that made the hallway smell like pine for 6 weeks. The audio catches, then finds its groove. Voices fill the speakers with the peculiar blend of pettiness and power that HOA boards cultivate when they forget they manage homes, not kingdoms. And then his face appears in a square, framed by the interior of his car, sunglasses pushed to the top of his head like a crown. His voice is cheerful the way invoices are cheerful before they're overdue. "We can make this worth your while," he says to the president, crisp as a ledger. "Ticket it this week, and I'll see that the contractor we discussed has the inside track." A folder opens to recorded Zoom calls with my boyfriend bribing an HOA president. The minutes are actually unedited recordings, illegal votes, code enforcement ambushes, and my boyfriend naming me as silent partner. The video window fills the TV like a confession booth no one meant to wire, a gallery of squares that weren't supposed to survive past the summary email. And within seconds, I recognize voices I've only heard as rumor in stairwells. The city inspector with the clipped diction who writes citations as if they're haiku, the HOA president who insists on order of business, even when the business is disorder, Jake coordinating timelines with the smoothness of a concertmaster calling cues. My boyfriend's square sits lit from the dashboard of his car, sunglasses in his hair like a halo he hasn't earned, and he says my name with the casual ownership of a man reciting inventory. "My silent partner can carry the shortfall until closing," he offers, and he says it slowly as if crafting the sentence over my signature while I sleep. We listen as the inspector proposes a courtesy sweep of our block, the phrase rolling off his tongue with the kindness of a hurricane named after a grandmother, and the president nods while checking boxes in a shared spreadsheet that looks suspiciously like the one we just projected, dates and addresses lining up like soldiers. A vote is called mid-agenda, off motion, no quorum, 3 voices saying aye, while one asks if this is the right item, and the president says they can ratify retroactively, a phrase that doesn't appear in bylaws but does appear in schemes. In another clip, Jake talks through a Friday drop for violation door hangers, hit before trash pickup so the street looks messy. And the inspector obliges with a tight smile, repeating the addresses as if savoring them. The paper trail, once a hunch, becomes choreography right there on screen. Violations backdated to create the illusion of a missed window to appeal. Timestamps scrubbed in a PDF editor so the afternoon becomes the previous week. Email drafts saved in a shared drive titled Minutes that no one will subpoena because who subpoenas minutes? A calendar event named Neighborhood Wellness Check that actually means surprise inspection. The euphemisms stacked like nesting dolls until the smallest one is panic, which is the only one they want families to hold. I pause the video at the moment a cursor slides over an address we all now know, and I track the line straight to the ledger's HOA fast track tag, 2 documents from 2 machines telling the same lie in harmony. Then there's the loan file open on his screen during a later call, my name in the top margin next to a resume I don't own, bullet points I never wrote, a title that upgrades me from laid-off founder to regional acquisitions lead, complete with a list of deals I supposedly closed. He tilts his laptop just enough for the president to read and says, "She's solid. Underwriting loves her." A sentence that pretends the difference between admiration and authorization does not exist. The camera catches the notary stamp on a sample page, the ink so light you can see the desk grain through it, and the president laughs softly like a man who knows which stamps are decorative and which are binding. I realize I've been holding the broken stem of my wineglass, the 2 halves of the base clicking against each other in my palm, like a metronome for a heartbeat that refuses to sprint, and I steady it the way you steady your voice when the thing you're naming would prefer to remain a fog. The candles near the TV flicker and then compose themselves, small flames deciding, and the sound system hums a low sympathetic note when the HDMI glitches and returns, as if the room itself is working to keep the picture clear. I explain, Not to perform smarts, but to give the neighborhood a vocabulary that will travel with them after the cake is boxed and the chairs are folded. When people use teleconferencing to coordinate bribes, when they share files across state lines or move money through apps, they expose themselves to wire fraud. When my name and resume are repurposed to encourage lending I never consented to, that's identity theft. When multiple parties agree to create false urgency using official channels, that's conspiracy, and it doesn't stop being conspiracy just because it wears a polo and calls itself civic pride. I don't raise my voice, and I don't let my hands do what anger wants. I let statute do the lifting because the law sounds different when it has faces to look at. The audience shifts in a way I feel before I see, phones rising not to mock my humiliation, but to document his admissions, screens reflecting in eyes that finally decide not to look away. The room learns to aim its attention like a camera, and the consent it gives is to truth, not to charm. A couple peels off to check on Anna's mother downstairs. Another neighbor begins a group text with addresses and timestamps and the banker's extension. My two friends station themselves at the edges of the crowd, like ushers guiding a community into its seat for the show that matters. He moves through the cluster with a smile that used to be magic, muttering about context, about misunderstanding, about helping these blocks stabilize. But the soundtrack has changed, and pleading plays poorly against playback. This isn't my private humiliation anymore, I say, and I feel the sentence click into the center of the evening like a new axis. It's a neighborhood case. I tilt the screen toward the people who have to live here tomorrow and the next day, and I watch their shoulders square as if the air handed them a posture. Somewhere below us, a dog starts barking with the urgency of an alarm we didn't set, and above it the night folds around the roof like a curtain preparing for a scene change. Sirens feather the edge of the block, distant at first, growing certain, their pitch threading through the string lights until even the candles seem to quiver with anticipation. He leans toward me as the noise closes in, his breath a whisper designed to leak guilt into my ear and not the air. "You called them?" he asks, and I keep my eyes on the screen and say, "I didn't." Two officers step off the elevator, but they're here for Anna. Her mother just reported a break-in. The room inhales as if the sirens have arrived to collect our breath, not our evidence. The officers step into the glow of the string lights, uniforms catching the candle shimmer, and the taller one asks, "Anna S?" Over the murmur, it's a timeline. Collision you feel in your bones. Party upstairs, crime downstairs, ring in motion. Anna raises her hand, already moving forward, and the wind across the roof shifts from festive to functional. Somewhere behind me, a mic on the bar pops as the DJ kills whatever song was cued next. The measured silence is cleaner than any playlist. I slide back to the laptop and pull the ledger into view, fingers steady from repetition, and scan the tabs with a hunter's eye. There it is. Tonight's date, beside Anna's mother's address. The note column stripped of euphemism. One word, entry. Sits where introduced buyer usually lives. I drag the cursor across the row and let the highlight bloom. Not for drama, but for clarity. The bank letter is still weighted against my wrist, the paper cool as a reminder. Upstairs has become command center. Downstairs is the arena where truth will test its legs. Across the table, his sister's phone lights her face like a campfire tale, and I watch her text a single word, abort, to a contact saved as boardroom. The name lands with an ugly elegance, a private joke dressed as a war room, and she lifts her gaze to me with a plea that mistakes itself for innocence. I don't return it. The choreography is visible now, even to people who only came for cake. He mouths something at her that looks like fix it, and for a flicker she seems shocked to realize the optics are no longer hers to manage. This is the decision point I won't get to rehearse, end the party or turn the party into a witness pool. I don't raise my voice, I project. I need anyone who heard the phone threat to stay with me, I say. Anyone who recognized addresses, come downstairs. If you film faces and timestamps. If you won't help, clear a path. It's not a scold, it's a redistribution. Heads nod, chairs scrape. Phones flip to camera with the crisp authority of a gavel. The crowd that mocked me an hour ago now calibrates itself to watch in the way that helps. I delegate without apology. My two real friends move to the officers, introduce themselves, and offer context. The ledger, the oitsachyo, HOA minutes, the recorded votes, the neighbor with the Allen wrench plants beside the TV, and scrolls slowly so the badges can copy rows as case numbers. I forward the entire USB directory to myself and to Anya, subject line, minutes, unedited, then send a second email with the ledger screenshots, CCing the fraud specialist on hold so the trail is double lit. A BCC my attorney's catch-all inbox, because there are habits a woman develops when she has learned contracts are the shadows men throw. We start moving. It isn't a stampede, it's choreography. The officers take the stairs for speed. We split between elevator and stairwell like a river meeting rock. The candles on the rooftop stutter in our wake and then settle. Their flicker a last nod to the version of the night that could have been. I carry the Isonzizi's broken wineglass stem in my pocket as a tactile metronome, the tiny edge clicking against my phone with each step, counting out a beat I want to keep slow. He tries to fall in stride beside me with a smile he hopes the officers will absorb as credibility, but a neighbor casually bodies him back, a reminder that crowds can learn new loyalties. The elevator feels like an airlock between genres. Upstairs, a deposition. Downstairs, a crime scene. In the mirrored panel, I catch our faces. Mindset, Anna pale and precise, his finally betraying the math he used to keep in his head. Doors open on the hallway that always smells like laundry and lemon oil, and the sound changes from rooftop hush to domestic echo. Porch lights blink awake as neighbors crack doors. The officers sweep their flashlights down the length of the corridor like high beams on a rural road. Anna's mother's door sits 3 steps off the elevator, paint nicked at the knob where a hanger might have scraped. The taller officer calls out, announces presence, and Anna answers for them, voice breaking into the key of a daughter. "Mom, it's me." From behind the door, the thin voice of relief answers back, then the chain rattles, then the deadbolt. My phone buzzes in my palm. Emails sent, copies archived, 3 receipts singing proof. I glance back just long enough to clock him at the far end of the hall, Jake at his shoulder, both trying to look accidental. We step across the threshold like we're entering a chapel, shoes quiet, eyes wide, attention reverent. The living room is tidy in the way that proves grief can coexist with order. Afghans folded, a stack of church bulletins, a wooden bowl with keys and pens. The kitchen drawer sits open with the stubbornness of a thing forced out of sequence. Papers fan across the counter like fallen birds. The officers split, one to the back door, one to the bedroom windows, and Anna's mother clutches her robe with a dignity I recognize from the women who raised the country with unthanked hands. I stay in the doorway, laptop to my chest, letting the officers do their work while I hold the perimeter of story and proof. The neighbor with the Allen wrench gestures toward the welcome mat, eyes narrowed. I follow his gaze, the hallway light catching something metallic where rubber should be. We all see it at once. The way you see a typo in a contract the second after the ink dries, a small, unnatural gleam lying exactly where a stranger would leave it if a return were planned. At Anna's door, we find a duplicate key on the mat with a realtor's tag. The lock turns without resistance. Inside, drawers are open, but nothing of value is taken, only documents. The officers sweep first, clearing corners and closets with methodical patience while Anna circles to her mother's side, murmuring reassurances that sound like stitches. The living room is intact in the way of a home that holds on. Family photos upright, a porcelain lamp uncracked, a small jar of peppermints waiting for grandkids who live farther away than guilt allows. But the paperwork is wrong. In the kitchen, a drawer yawns wide, file tabs splayed like tongues, and the piles they left behind read like a target list. Deed copies, medical notices, insurance EOBs, and the death certificate with its brutal economy of fonts. A jewelry box sits where it always sits, unbothered. The TV is where it was at dinner time. Whoever came wasn't shopping. They were harvesting. On the fridge, a square of yellow pulls the eye. The handwriting is blocky, deliberate, the pen pressed too hard as if intimidation can be forced into ink. Appointment, code enforcement, Monday 9 a.m. The officers exchange a look that needs no translation. The timing lines up with the ledger's HOA fast track column and the courtesy sweep we just watched on screen. Plant the note, seed the fear, then arrive in uniform to confirm the anxiety you cultivated. It's a cycle that relies on 2 things: paper that looks official and neighbors too tired to argue with clipboards. He arrives a minute later, breathless with performance, hands up in the universal pantomime of innocence. "What is happening?" he asks, eyes darting from Anna's mother to the officers to the drawer, to the key on the mat, as if the scene were staged by a director with a budget he didn't approve. "Jake handles the neighborhood stuff," he says quickly, giving the script its first scapegoat. "I swear I don't know anything about a break-in." He presses one palm to his chest, the same hand that lifted a glass an hour ago to roast me like an entree, and I watch his sister hover behind him, phone tucked, face set to neutral. I pick up the realtor tagged key from the mat with a napkin and hold it up to the kitchen light. The tag bears a logo I don't recognize, but the license number is clean, printed in a sans serif that tries to look honest. "Give me the TV," I tell the neighbor who babysat the projector upstairs, and he opens the email I sent myself, the ledger screenshot with the column where the buyers get sourced and the facilitators get their abbreviations. We match the license number on the tag to a line in his sheet. There it is, tied to 2 previous addresses, both marked expedite. Both close within 45 days. The room inhales again, and this time I hear the start of outrage, not just shock. My boyfriend's eyes flick to the exit and back, calculating, and I can tell he feels the circle recenter without him. "You're twisting this," he says, and the words land limp. I set the foreclosure notice on the counter, its heading like a tiny floodlight, and use it the way an investigator uses a flashlight. Follow the dates to the addresses, trace the overlaps that turn story into pattern. The date of Anna's father's death sits beside the first violation in the city's portal. The lien posts 2 weeks later. Jake's intro logs the next day. The ledger stamps entry for tonight. It isn't coincidence, it's choreography. The officers take notes with a precision I recognize from depositions. One asks Anna's mother for permission to photograph the sticky note, the open drawer, the fridge, the key. The other asks me to walk them through the videos on the USB again when we're upstairs, and as he speaks, his radio crackles with a dispatcher's calm. He looks at my boyfriend and says, "If you have nothing to hide, you won't mind answering a few questions separately." And the line carries just enough gravity to tilt the room. He gestures toward Jake, who has materialized in the doorway like an unpaid extra trying to upgrade his role. "He runs logistics," my boyfriend insists. "If something happened here, he went rogue." Jake's smile is gone. His hands ride the seam of his jeans, thumbs worrying the threads. I remember Jake reaching for my laptop with that practiced helpfulness, the way men like him trade on competence until it's time to hand the bill to someone else. We are past the point where talk fixes anything. The taller officer glances at the realtor tag key, at the sticky note, at the ledger line on the TV, and asks the question that has been walking toward us since the sirens. "Do we have cause to search the vehicle connected to either of you?" He is careful, not grandstanding, building a record brick by brick. I meet Anna's eyes, then her mother's, then the officer's. "Our cause is in that ledger and on that screen," I say, and the officer nods to Anna for the call. She doesn't hesitate. She points toward the garage with a steadiness that could nail wood. "His car," she says, naming my boyfriend's make and model like a sentence. We move again, the hallway a corridor of witnesses and porch lights, the elevator swallowing and releasing us like we are the ones being processed. In the garage, concrete holds the day's heat like a grudge. The officer asks for permission. My boyfriend stammers, "Sure," because refusal would read like confession, then fumbles with his key fob long enough to make everyone watch. Trunk pops. The interior light clicks on, a dim oval that makes dust motes look like actors hitting their marks. There's a folded blanket draped over something rectangular. The officer pulls it back in one smooth motion. Underneath, stacked with bureaucratic neatness, sit manila packets with the HOA logo pre-printed and the resident line already filled. The top form bears Anna's mother's name. The violation box is ticked, the signature line empty as a dare. In his trunk, under a blanket, a stack of HOA violation packets pre-filled with Anna's mother's name. Back upstairs, guests sit in a circle like jurors. A party becomes sworn memory. We re-enter the rooftop and the string lights feel harsher, as if the bulbs decided they were fluorescents now, and the music stays dead because anything with a beat would be obscene. Chairs scrape into a ring that isn't ceremonial so much as practical, and the officers position themselves at opposite edges with notebooks open, recording names, phone numbers, and the kinds of details that pin a night to the floor when narrative would rather float. I watch people trade roles with a visible shame. The laughers of an hour ago straighten into witnesses, and the ones who smiled through his roast now glance at the screen, and at me, and at the door like they are choosing a country. We begin with timestamps, because time is the only honest narrator left. The neighbor who stood by the projector notes the exact minute the ledger appeared on the TV, the exact second the Hobihara collateral tab displayed my name, and the time the sirens hit the block like a second clock. My two real friends recount the phone threat word for word, the cadence of the caller's voice, the way the last 4 digits snapped like staples. Someone volunteers the moment they saw his sister type abort to boardroom, and another confirms it by the glint on her screen. I take down surnames, building numbers, the corner tables where people were standing when certain sentences were said, and the act of writing calms the room like rain after heat. I read from the bank letter again, not to wound him a second time, but to fasten the date to the recording we all watched. The notice date lines up with the first courtesy sweep in the HOA video. The default warning sits the morning before the backdated violation batch, and the payment due date matches the week Jake labeled entry beside Anna's mother's address. The officers ask me to hold the letter just so, while one photographs the header beside the paused video frame, and the image of official paper and candid corruption in a single capture makes my throat sting in a way that has nothing to do with humiliation and everything to do with relief. We dial into the HOA Zoom again because context is the refuge of the guilty, and the president answers with the tone of a man who believes his title buys him time. He says the word context so many times it becomes weather, insists the some expedite notes were merely reminders to keep neighborhoods safe, and accidentally admits, on a mic he forgets isn't muted, that votes were pushed through between meetings because sometimes speed is the point. The officers exchange a single not small glance that reads like a signature. Jake tries to interrupt with a clarification that collapses into a cough when the president, flustered, says, "Well, you told me Fridays are best for optics," and the sentence lands in the ring like a dropped wrench. The emotional pivot has been waiting inside me since the first joke broke skin. I let the room settle and then stand without raising the letter, because I want empty hands for this part. I want the record to reflect what happened to me, I say, and I am surprised by how steady my voice is. How it carries without the mic. My name was placed on a loan I did not sign. My resume was forged to justify a larger amount. And when I began to ask questions, my life was turned into entertainment, because public humiliation is a control tactic. It distracts the audience, and it exhausts the target. Nobody moves, the candles flicker, correct themselves, and hold. I set boundaries out loud because silence is where theft grows. I am not a cosigner, I am not a silent partner, and I am not a punchline. Each clause earns its own breath, and each breath sends ripples around the circle that look like people remembering how to sit upright. My boyfriend laughs once in the old key and stops when no one harmonizes. He starts a sentence with my name and abandons it when the officer with the notebook raises a hand, the way a judge might lift a gavel just enough to imply would. The circle remains a circle, and tonight it is not for toasting, it is for oath without ceremony. The officers request that everyone remain available for formal statements, and a murmur of assent moves clockwise like the passing of a cup. They ask for any screenshots to be airdropped to a case file address, and for anyone with concerns about retaliation to say so now, not later, so resources can be arranged. A woman from 2 buildings over lifts her phone and shares text from a number labeled Neighborhood Care. Jake's pitch in a different costume. A man shows an email whose subject line reads, "Inspection Reminder," from an account that mimics the city domain by a missing letter. Each example pulls the room a degree closer to cohesion. I ask one more favor from the room, and it is not small. If you've ever wondered what it feels like to be the person who is told she's overreacting while someone else fills out forms in her name, it feels like this, I say. So if you are willing, put your contact into the group thread now, add your building number, and write yes if we can use your statement publicly when the time comes. Hands rise. Phones glow. The circle becomes a network. For the first time tonight, my chest loosens enough to let hope in without bargaining for it. I reach into my clutch and pull out the torn pink card, the flap lifted where the USB was taped, and I hold it up like a relic that learned how to testify. The officers tilt forward instinctively, and the ring leans with them. I have one last question for tonight, I say, and I let the measured pause land like a gavel before the verdict. I hold up the torn birthday card and say, "Who put this in our mailbox? Because the camera saw you." I place the broken monogrammed wine glass beside the bank letter and the USB, my own evidence exhibit. The stem wobbles once against the table and comes to rest, a thin halo of glass dust catching the candlelight like frost. The officers have moved the projector so it faces the entryway where the camera feed loops above the dessert table, and on the screen the night plays itself back with the clarity of a confession. There is Jake at 3:11 p.m., shoulders squared, baseball cap low, sliding the pink birthday card into our building mailbox with the casual choreography of a man filing a receipt. 30 seconds later, my boyfriend's sister appears at the edge of the frame, glancing up not at the lens but at her reflection in the glass, the sealed bank envelope pinched between two fingers like a delicate errand. She tucks it under the card as if tidying. At the curb, headlights idling, my boyfriend waits in the driver's seat, phone glowing pale across his jaw like a second smaller moon. The camera timestamp sits beneath their faces in numbers that don't blink, and even the playlistless air hushes to watch them sign their names without a pen. The taller officer nods once, closes his notebook with a soft thud, and the quiet shifts into consequence. Jake doesn't run. He slumps, which is a kind of confession, and the other officer steps in with the practiced gentleness of someone who knows to keep dignity available even when handcuffs appear. The sister starts to explain the concept of favors and errands and miscommunications and looks down mid-sentence as if the truth has laced her shoes together. My boyfriend keeps his gaze pinned to the cake knife, calculating nothing useful. A dispatcher on speaker confirms the case number. The bank analyst on the call flags the loan, codes it for fraud review, and instructs me to expect a written confirmation that my name will not be treated as consent. The HOA board pulled back into the Zoom, faces arranged like a checkerboard of dawning comprehension, announces an emergency public meeting, and the president, suddenly hyper-aware of his own square, asks in a voice pitched 2 octaves lower if a city mediator should attend. I tell him to spell mediator correctly on the agenda. He swallows and nods. Justice tonight isn't a gavel, it's a sequence. I sign nothing. I let the officers photograph the letter, the ledger, the USB, the sticky note on the fridge. I let them copy the files while emails fly to the fraud desk, to the city attorney, to the HOA liaison, who now wishes he had read the bylaws that he once weaponized. I file an identity theft report and forward the entire folder to the state attorney general with a subject line I never imagined I would write on my birthday. Recording unedited, pattern. The send bar completes like a tide, and leaves me standing in a version of my life where proof sits beside dessert, where candles run down and wax pools like punctuation. There's a moment when the adrenaline lowers its volume and your body remembers the cost of vigilance. I lean on the table with both hands and look at the exhibit I've built. The glass that broke without spilling me, the letter that warned without asking permission, the USB that proved what no apology could touch. I owe myself more than a lesson, so I say the apology. Out loud so it will count. I'm sorry I stayed small so someone else could feel big. I'm sorry I let ridicule pass for intimacy. I'm sorry I believed privacy and secrecy were twins. Then I adjust the apology into a vow. I will make advocacy my instinct, not my last resort. I start with Anna's mother at the end of the hall, who now has 3 neighbors in her kitchen and a calendar on the fridge that lists a bogus inspection. Tomorrow we will replace it with a real one, scheduled with a witness and a badge that earns its name. Around me the room reorganizes into a coalition. Phone screens glow while numbers become a thread named in all caps. Mail. Minutes. Rights. And people who have only traded nods in an elevator ad, addresses, unit numbers, and who they can call in the morning. We sketch a watch schedule for the mailbox bank. A retired teacher volunteers to read board packets before they're voted on. A contractor offers to look at code citations before panic takes root. The neighbor with the Allen wrench drafts a 1-page guide in notes and airdrops it around. How to spot a predatory flip disguised as help. How to verify city emails. how to document every visit with a photo and a timestamp, how to turn a threat into a record rather than a secret. I add a section on consent in finance, what co-signing is, what it's not, why your love story doesn't need a signature to prove itself, and a checklist for digital paper trails. Request audit logs, keep originals, forward duplicates to an account they don't know exists. I lift a glass base and set it square beside the letter and the drive, the trilogy aligned edge to edge like a small museum of my own unhushing. The candles throw a quiet, steady light across them, and the mic, long since muted, rests on its side, as if it too is tired of hosting performance. The officers confer by the door. Neighbors begin stacking plates. The projector hums a soft, relieved note as the screen goes dim. In the doorway, two city council aides who slipped in during the sirens trade, looks that suggest the meeting will be crowded and the minutes, actual minutes, will be long. They lead him past me, wrists in front, not behind, because protocol allows dignity when there is no struggle. He keeps his eyes forward until the threshold, where impulse betrays calculation, and he looks over his shoulder with a smile that once worked on rooms. His voice drops just for me, the last counterfeit intimacy he'll spend tonight. As officers escort my boyfriend out, he turns and says, "Check your credit report in the morning." What else did he sign in my name? Been through HUV pressure, predatory flips, or identity theft? Share your story below. Your warning could protect a neighbor. Comment checklist if you want my mail. Minutes. Rights cheat sheet and fraud reporting template. I'll pin the resources. Subscribe and hit the bell for the public meeting outcome and the credit report fallout. Share this with one person who needs to see these red flags before they sign anything, and drop one takeaway you learned. I'll feature the most useful tip in the next upload.